Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar. We're waiting for all of our attendees to arrive and we'll be starting shortly. Just hold tight. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us. I'm Denise Vigno with Howard Center. We want to welcome everyone to our weekly speaker series in recognition of World Mental Health all throughout October. We have close to 200 guests joining us this evening. And certainly while we wish we could see one another in person, we're really grateful to have these webinars available as a way to stay connected. World Mental Health Day was this past Saturday, and we're taking the opportunity to raise awareness by sharing community resources, including this speaker series, all in the spirit of this year's global movement, which is about access to mental health supports for everyone, everywhere. Ensuring access to care is critical to the work we do here at Howard Center, and really especially relevant in the midst of a pandemic. We're very much looking forward to hearing our guests talk about their experiences with mental health, stigma, and more in just a few minutes. But before we get started, I do want to take this opportunity to say thank you very much to our sponsors for their support. Our champion sponsors, Hannaford and Seventh Generation, our advocates, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont and Marsh and McLennan, our supporters, Ben & Jerry's and Burton, and our allies, Invest EAP in Timberlane Dental. And a very special thank you to our friends at Seventh Generation for their many months of volunteer support and event planning. We have a few housekeeping notes to review. They're now up on the screen. During the webinar, attendees' audio, video, and chat will not be available. Your Q&A, however, will be available throughout the entire session, and you may ask questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Your questions will go directly to the panelists and they may be asked anonymously. They'll work to answer as many questions as they can once we get to that point. We will also be recording tonight's webinar and we'll make it available at howardcenter.org in the coming days. Before we begin tonight's conversation, we have a very special video we'd like to share about Howard Center's Arts Collective in recognition of World Mental Health. You'll hear directly from some of the collective members about their experience with art and community. Go ahead and please start the video.
Art helps me breathe. It brings my curiosity alive. If somebody looks at my work and it makes them feel something, if it elicits an emotion in them, then I know that it's good.
I would describe my style as like medieval woodcut printings and old medical illustrations. Usually I start with more serious works that are meant to be seen or sold. That's like 8 or 10 hours a day. Then during downtime, like my time off, I'd just be working in my art journals, just doodling.
I have a routine. I get up every morning, I take it upstairs to the kitchen table and start making one almost every day of the week. These are my favorites.
I got to be more of a dedicated artist just by keeping it simple. Somehow it helped me get focused. This is a watercolor. I'm trying to give some texture to it like you'd see with oil paints or acrylics.
I have a lot of difficulties verbalizing things, so I use imagery a lot. It's very therapeutic for me. I'm able to quell the demons inside me, I guess.
In my life, I've had many chapters, and some of them I've fallen very, very deep into an abyss. So art is part of my survival and gives meaning to my life.
What I'm trying to do now is transform a diagnosis into a skill. It's a good way to heal.
It's like mindfulness. I feel happy and productive.
I first started with the Arts Collective in 2019.
Seeing other people's art, talking with people about their process, enjoying being around other artists and talking about their work in very different mediums.
Sharing artwork we've created with each other.
And so I feel like I'm a part of a really dynamic community.
There's a camaraderie there that, you know, that came unexpected to me. I didn't know that I would be able to experience that again.
That was very moving. What a beautiful piece. And we hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. I want to thank Kara and Sarah, Tom, Carolyn, Steve, and Mo for their many hours of work together to share their stories and create this video. The Arts Collective exhibits a few times each year, most recently at our local Art Hop, and plans are underway to create a virtual show this winter. You can always stay apprised of their work at howardcenter.org. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our special guest, Bassey Ikpi, and tonight's moderator, Dr. Jude Smith Rachele. We are international tonight as Jude is joining us from an international location, and I understand it's quite late where she is. Jude has led Howard Center's diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts for the past 5 years and is also the CEO and co-founder of Abundant Sun, a global cultural transformation agency that works to help companies live their corporate values. Jude has worked in the area of diversity, unconscious bias, inclusive leadership, and cultural competence for the past 25 years and is passionate about raising social awareness and promoting social justice. Welcome, Jude. And now it's my privilege to introduce our guest speaker, Bassey Ikpi, visiting us from Maryland. Bassey embodies the brilliance of multifaceted creative minds, a writer, a performer, an advocate, and the author of the instant New York Times bestselling book, I'm Telling the Truth, But I'm Lying. Her collection of essays has been described as beautiful and compelling, visceral and comforting, and Bassey has been described as an alchemy of intellect, humor, and pathos. She's an active voice in pop culture, commentary, and the mental health community, and has published extensively. As the founder of the Seaway Project, a mental health organization, Bassey also created the global movement #NoShameDay, an initiative that aims to reduce stigma and increase mental health awareness. Bassey, thank you so much for being with us here in Vermont. I'll turn it over to both you and Jude. Welcome.
Fantastic. Denise, thank you very much. And thank you to the Howard Center team for getting us all here in the Zoom room this afternoon, this evening. If we were in a studio or in a physical space, I'm sure there'd be some clapping for you, Bassey. to congratulate you for the tremendous art that you've given to the world, both when you were busy with the Def Jam poetry, but also the amazing novel that you shared with us that we'll have some opportunity to speak about this evening. So a great, big, enormous welcome to you. Where in the world are you, Bassey, calling in from?
I am in Lanham, Maryland, which is a Maryland suburb of DC.
Okay, so that's home to you now and has been for a little while?
Technically, if you woke me up and asked me, I'd say Brooklyn, but I've been here for a decade, so I guess it's Maryland now.
Right, okay, and obviously the book features very highly the Brooklyn experience for you, so we can see where your heart is there with that.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us here with Howard Center. We're celebrating World Mental Health Day, but as Denise says, it's 2020. We're going through a global pandemic. We are celebrating for the month, but I think 2020 will be known as World Mental Health Year for all of us. And just wondering, just to start your days, how are you feeling today and what are you doing to keep yourselves grounded during the pandemic?
Something that I've adopted is I say I'm doing better than I've been, but not as good as I could be. And that's been the standard, I think, very early on. And I think it's because of my history with mental health. I adapted pretty quickly to the shutdown and everything, but somewhere in the middle, things got confusing because it felt like an environmental depression. And I wasn't feeling depressed, so it was it started getting a little tricky to navigate, and I had to make a couple of changes in order to survive this in a way that that would make sense for me. And so I've over the last 3 or 4 months, I think I've figured something out, and it's a routine that works for me. It's a chaotic routine, but it's mine. And it's something that I can count on in the beginning and the end of my days, and sometimes in the middle. But I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
That's good. Yeah, equally so. Just trying to find the steady, the steady rhythms with all of it. That we're living in this state of flux, and I think it's a big challenge to remember who we are, and actually to remember what we want out of this life. Sometimes it feels like it's hard to get it. Now, I've had the privilege to enjoy the audiobook. As I was saying, I'm not in the States at the moment, so best way for me to get my hands on it was to do it through that means. But could you just tell the folks that are with us this evening just a little bit about the book itself and what the inspiration was that got you to writing it for?
Yes. The book is a collection of essays. They made me call it essays. I was referring to them as nonfiction short stories because that's what they felt like to me. But for the sake of labels and genre, they were essays. But it is a collection of stories. You'd think I'd know how to respond to this question by now, but it's a journey through my mental health, but then also not really. It's a way to explore the words that we hear: anxiety, depression, mania, and we know them as symptoms, and they're very categorized, but people don't really know what it means to have insomnia, what that feels like, what it feels like to have anxiety, what it feels like to go through these moments when it feels like your brain is on a whole different course than you recognize. So it's a story of a person's mental health from the inside out, I think. Today, that's what it is.
Yeah, sure. And can you just share with everyone what your diagnosis was or that you received as part of your journey?
Yes, I was diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder.
And the difference between 1 and 2?
The difference between 1 and 2, 1 is the one that we're most familiar with, right? So 1 is the one that all of the books and media, they talk about, because it's the one that is the most ostentatious. It's the one that's the bigger one. I like to say that bipolar 1 is more of like an external explosion, whereas bipolar 2 is more an internal implosion, and something that it comes across very much like personality as opposed to symptoms. And so it's very difficult to diagnose. Many people don't even get diagnosed because they just kind of live their life thinking, well, this is just the way I am. I was very fortunate to have a proper diagnosis. Otherwise, I don't know what I would have done. But yeah, I 2 is quieter, but it's quieter in a way that is just as dangerous for the person experiencing it. And because it's so quiet, it really does fly under the radar in a way that that causes problems for a lot of people.
Yeah. How did the diagnosis, you said it was very helpful. So tell us a little bit about that, and if it came with any sense of relief at all.
The diagnosis was helpful because I had reached a point in my life where I could no longer deny that there was something going on. I can go back and suspect, things from the age of, 3 or 4 years old. And then when I was like 8 years old and different times like that. But this was a time when I couldn't deny it. Like there was something happening. It's one thing to feel different. It's another thing to feel different and immobile. I had told myself a story about myself that was told through the lens of this thing that I didn't even know I had. So I was lazy, I was unreliable, I was bad with money, I was hyperactive, I was moody, all these different things that I just sort of taken on as my personality. But when it started getting scary, when it started getting foggy, when it started getting dark, when I fell into the depressive parts of it, because the hypomania is cool, kind of, you know what I mean? Like you're doing a lot of work, you're seeing people, but when you fall into the depression and you're alone and by yourself and you just this despair that you fall into, that alerted me. And when that lasted too long for my taste, when it started going on for longer than what I was used to, knowing that it had a name, knowing that there was a name to it, which means that there's a cure. That's what I thought at the time. So you name it, you cure it, I go about my business. So there was relief in that instance, but there was no relief in knowing that it was a chronic, permanent thing that I would be dealing with for the rest of my life. That I didn't like at all, but I did like knowing that if there was another person in the universe who had the same thing, it had a name for that reason. Right. And that was comforting.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that really good insight. And you talk a lot about the fog and knowing that when the fog was descending, that would be that moment where you might need some assistance. And our tagline with Howard Center is "Help is here," and we're very grateful always when people acknowledge and get the assistance that they need, because sometimes that's one of the hardest elements to get to. So may I just ask, you do mention a little bit about guilt and shame and disappointment. Can you tell us a little bit more about that emotional reaction that you had? And I'm just curious about, were you disappointed in yourself as you were going through this evolution? Is it a disappointment in the world? How would you capture that?
I was definitely disappointed with myself, in myself. I'm the eldest daughter of African immigrants. There are expectations. I was born in Nigeria, but I was raised primarily in the States. We came to the States when I was about 4 years old. But there were expectations, silent expectations, that I just wasn't measuring up, and no one was really measuring me. I can't say that I had an experience where I was told that I wasn't doing well, but you can feel it. You know what the response is. You know how people react to you, and you can gauge by that. And I just didn't feel like I knew how to get it together, and I took that as a personal failing. Often, when I was good at something, I was great at it. I would excel, but then something else would happen and I would fail, in my estimation, or I couldn't sustain the level that I had built up to. So I was very much disappointed in myself. And I don't think, I'm not going to say never is a big word. I don't think I can recall a time when someone has said that they were disappointed in me in the way that I felt. Of course, you know, your parents will say, I'm so disappointed, and it, you know, but the way the depths of my own self-disappointment is something that I carried. I don't think it's anything that anyone placed on me. And even just as a human being, you measure yourself up to the people around you, whether it be in school. I was an athlete, so you know, who's the fastest, who's, you know, I was a dancer, who's, you know, all these different things, who gets the solos. And you can, but imagine that in the context of like every day, all aspects of life, not just these very specialized fields or areas.
And there's massive cultural expectation that it sounds as though you're having to respond to, and we'll get to a moment, you know, to the sort of Nigerian African context of parenting and expectations. I was also struck in the book about the one essay when you were talking about seeing the chicken being slaughtered for your dinner, and how your elders could see that you were really upset about the life of this animal being taken, and yet they said to you that that wasn't what was on your plate for dinner that night.
Yeah. Yeah. It was important for me to include that in the book for a couple of reasons, but one of the main ones was because I think it's how you sort of learn to not trust yourself. I think gaslighting is a strong word, because I think there's a context and there's an intent there. So I don't think that the intent was to teach me how to question or to doubt my own experience, but that was the result. And it's one of my earliest and clearest memories, especially because, you know, I mentioned the stew. When you eat rice and stew, Nigerian rice and stew, it's very red. And I just saw chicken. Like, what are you telling me? You know, like, I see it, but you're telling me it's not. I'm for. I guess it isn't. And you know, so yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you very much. So let's talk a little bit about Nigeria. I mean, I'm also quite curious. I get labeled as an African American. I've never been to Africa, but I would consider that you are truly African American. You call yourself Nigerian American.
Yeah.
What perspective, I mean, especially when we're looking at American culture, right? And also looking at issues around mental well-being and mental health. What kind of insights do you think you bring into this space by virtue of your heritage being Nigerian American?
What's interesting is that my entire life, if you asked me where I was from, I would say Nigeria. I knew that I'm, you know, American in this abstract kind of way. I'm actually, you know, I'm Black before I'm anything else. Like, my Blackness, I think, precedes. That's just the way we were raised. We're Black, and everything else is a fine tuning, is an added descriptor. So it's. For a long time, I'm Nigerian. I'm Nigerian, I'm from Nigeria, until I went to Nigeria, and I spent about 3 years off and on there. And I realized that I am extremely, very culturally American. So Nigeria is my place of birth. It's where my ancestors are from. But when it comes to culture, I'm a Black American. And that is something that I've always known, but it was never as clear as it was when I was there and realized that there's a whole different culture. As much as, you know, my parents would try and preserve some of that, of course, America would seep in. So my point of view, the way I expressed myself, the way I walked, the way I talked, the way as a woman I entered a room, all of that was very American. And I didn't realize that until much later. So I think calling myself Nigerian American is an orientation. It's sort of directing you to where I'm from, but I am Black, and I'm Black. That's as far as, especially now, I think it's very important for me to place myself in the diaspora and help to connect us, because I think that there are ways in which we don't see ourselves in each other, and ways that kind of creep up from time to time, where there's an argument between West Indians and you know, Black people in the UK and Black people in Africa and Black people in Nigeria and South Africa and all these different things. And those conversations that are so divisive don't ever really speak to how interconnected we are, how our experiences, you know, the names may change, the food changes slightly, but at the very root and base of it, it's the same thing. Like, there are stories that someone can tell about their grandmother, and I can tell the same story just in a different language, you know, and I think that's more important as I've gotten older. I mean, always, but as I've gotten older, that's more important to me than anything else. Being very clear that my Blackness is part of a larger conversation for all Black people, connecting us in the diaspora.
And
Long
to
answer.
yeah, and to what extent do you gather some strength from that?
I don't want to minimize the importance of knowing where you're from, but it's not as important to me than where I am. And I don't know whether or not that's because of the way my brain works and my memory works, where I need to be very present all the time and very mindful, and stay rooted in something grounded. I don't know if that's the case, but it's always been about, just being very present. I think that even when I look at my upbringing compared to you know, my friends who are Nigerian as well, who were raised in America or born in America, my parents weren't as hard on us. You know, there was no pressure. The pressure we felt was sort of self-inflicted. So my experiences were different than other Nigerian Americans. So I'm realizing just how strange. Like, I'm trying to answer your question. I'm like, this is just, it's weird. It's a very Ikpi family thing, not to I don't know.
It's all good. I mean, it's a fluid thing, right? And in terms of identity and heritage, I understand that entirely. I mean, it makes me think of, you know, I'm not prone to do DNA swabs to figure out where I'm from because it doesn't change where I am today.
Yeah. And it's very much for me like the way that, you know, New Yorkers, no matter where you are, they'll let you know that they're from New York. And they're American, but they're from, and I feel like sometimes that my Nigerianness is like, almost like Nigeria is another state, it's another part of the country. So the influences from that part, like any region in any place that you are, any, you know, any regional dialect, any regional cultural expressions, that's what it is for me. Like, I grew up eating the food, and I grew up eating the food, but I didn't grow up pressured to learn how to cook, right? And that's something that my Nigerian American friends, especially the oldest daughter, like it's unheard of for the eldest daughter in an African family not to cook, and I don't. And it was just never a big deal, but it was a huge deal when I went to Nigeria. I was like, oh, you don't cook? Oh my God, it was like the worst thing in the world, but it's just not how I was raised. It's not how we were.
Can you tell us a little bit about, in terms of mental health and culture? In my understanding, if in some of our African cultures, you're looking at issues of disability or mental health, and they're still very strongly social taboo. Has that been at all your experience?
It's a combination of things. It is also this idea, which is also very Black American, which is you don't air your dirty laundry. You keep private things private. You know, if someone's sick, you don't mention it at all. They could literally pass away and you would never know because it's just not talked about. But there is, due to colonization and what Christianity has done to the continent, there's a conversation about how mental health and mental illness is tied into spiritual warfare, or I remember hearing when I was in Nigeria, spiritual attack. You know, somebody's village people are doing you. That's what they call it. The village people are doing you, meaning that they're casting some sort of root on you, and that's why you're behaving this way. And that's why, you know, your business venture failed. So it's looked at it in that way. And when I was there, I made a very conscious decision to be very transparent because of my privilege, as far as my occupation. I was interviewed on, television and radio and things like that. And I was able to present myself as someone living with a mental illness, when in the country, what you see are people who are homeless, who are on the streets because their family threw them out because a mental health issue is you're a witch, or it's witchcraft, it's a spiritual thing, and they have to, you have to be removed from the house. And so to present and say, the only difference between me and those people that you passed on the way into this building, is that I have support from family and friends. I am, I do have medical attention. I'm not thrown away or cast aside because of it. So it was very important for me to be someone who was vocal in that way, because the conversations around mental health, they're evolving. Just in the 5 years that I've been back from Nigeria, I've seen all sorts of nonprofits pop up, that are, mental health advocacy groups, and people are much more open about it. But there is a shift. When I was there, and I would try to, I had a depressive episode when I was there, and I of course immediately went to go seek out a doctor, and I saw a psychiatrist who asked me if I would have time to be, if I had time to be depressed if I was married and had some children. And this is a medical professional. This was his very professional point of view, and that's what people go through, So yeah, there's still a ways to go, but it has come a long way.
Yeah, there's a little bit of blame that's attached to that kind of questioning.
Yeah,
That gets thrown
it's about
back.
a moral failure. It's a character flaw. You're not trying hard enough. Like, it's very much, are you trying though? Are you trying though? Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you very much for that advocacy. I mean, it is very much needed. It's needed worldwide, which is why we have World Mental Health Day. But certainly we are up against it in many cultures because of these taboos and superstitions, really, that are attached to the experiences that people are having, which is important to challenge and undo. As I was mentioning that I did some work at some point teaching cross-cultural psychology to some PhD students that are working to be clinical psychologists. And I was using a book, Eastern and Western Approaches to Healing. And it was really about also helping people in a cultural context. This is in the New York metropolitan area, to know that when you're coming into contact with people who are coming from different cultural contexts, behavior that could be normal in their cultural context might be seen as abnormal in our own Western context. And to run a risk of misdiagnosis could be quite high if you don't have that level of cultural competence. So I'm just wondering how, if at all, when you see the different approaches, what's been your experience either here or there with regards to understanding? I mean, you made mention of the comment about you'd probably be fine if you were married and had children and knew how to cook. But I'm just curious about the kind of Eastern-Western approach in your mind's eye.
I remember I was in Nairobi a few years ago, and I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's since passed, and he was telling me about conversations he's had in South Africa about mental health, and the way that there's a and I don't want to get this wrong, but there's a group of people who are known to be, who would be known to be mentally ill, I guess, but they're seen as seers, and they're seen as healers, and they're seen as people with certain gifts, and ways that they can contribute to society, and they're held in that way. And I do believe that's a very African thing. I've also read, before I was diagnosed, I read everything. I was trying to figure it out on my own, and I would read everything I possibly could. I went to every psychic and healer and everything, trying to figure this out. And I think that there's something to be said about that. I think there's something to be said about the way our brains work, and learning how to tap into that. I'm somebody who believes that I do take medication, I do see a therapist, but I don't numb myself. I still feel. I think that I'm far more empathetic and compassionate, and able to sort of my intuition is high, and I hesitate to speak about it in those terms because I don't want to give anyone like a false idea of what it is, because so much of this, again, the symptoms are grandiose thinking and thinking you're supernatural and on all these things. And part of me is like, okay, there's a reason why we all feel like that though. There's a reason why we believe that about ourselves. It's not like everyone gets a fever, right? It's these very specific things that people feel when they're diagnosed with this. And my thing has always been, how do I protect myself? How do I stay healthy? And then how do I also maintain the very core of who I am? And that comes from knowing and understanding that there's more to it than just these diagnoses, these medications and whatever. When I'm speaking generally, I want to make sure that people are healthy. First and foremost, I want to make sure that people are not in danger. I want to make sure people are safe. I want to make sure that people are in a position to take care of themselves. And sometimes that does mean going the Western medical way, just to ground and steady yourself, and then, figure it out from there. I've gone from the highest dosages to the lowest because I have figured out a way to exist in this world. I had to rethink and reshape and redefine what success meant to me. I had to redefine what productivity means to me. I had to understand that I'm somebody who is constantly working, like my brain is constantly going. And so when I sit down to write, it's not that, oh my God, I didn't get any work done. It's my brain is working. Like I am always processing things. I'm always writing in my head. And it's only when I sit down at a table or sit down somewhere at my laptop to write where the words come out. So before I would judge when the words came out as when I was productive. Now I've learned that every moment of my life is productive, right? So yes, I don't have any like clear philosophies about that. But I do hold on to the idea that there is, I hesitate to use the word gift, but I do think that there is a gift in everything. I think there's a lesson in everything. I think there's a purpose in everything. And and again, that doesn't mean that I just quit my medication and stop seeing my therapist, because I have to exist in this world. I have to, protect myself, and I want to be a living person and an active participant in the world. And so that's the way that I've learned to sort of balance these two ideas that I hold. And I don't talk about it publicly often because I think that people kind of take it the wrong way. Like, I don't need medication. I don't need anything. I'm a superhero. And, we have Kanye, so yeah.
And I think, that's absolutely, when it's balance, right? And there's no yes or no, there's no right or wrong. And I think the challenge is figuring out what is that right individual balance for us. Right.
Yeah.
So that we have that
Absolutely.
sense of well-being, and sometimes it's experimental, right? And I think it's important that we don't discount, and I love what you say in terms of not numbing oneself, right? And maybe even sometimes one needs to numb, but is that a forever kind of situation? Again, these are judgments that have to be made, given what people are experiencing. So I think that's really important. And really also what I'm hearing you saying is that it's a creative process, right? Like you said, I only thought that I was being productive if there was actually something flowing from my fingers through a pen onto a piece of paper. But actually stepping back and realizing that no matter what we're experiencing, this is the creative process, and we're working to figure it out, even though there's nothing in the conventional sense that's being produced at that moment in time according to a clock. We're actually getting someplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing. So in terms of where we are in 2020 right now, like we said, we've got World Mental Health Day, year,
decade.
Right. You speak a lot in terms of having to live with some of the uncertainties and the ups and downs and the waves. And I'm just wondering, what kind of advice would you give to us in terms of helping us all get through some of our challenges?
Be
And not
kind
that
to
you have all
yourself.
the answers, right? I don't want to put you
Well,
on the
no,
spot.
but
Right.
I do have, I definitely don't have all the answers. I'd be a much different person if I did.
Mhm.
But I think that what I'm learning the most and what I've seen people need to do is to be kinder to themselves, and
Mm.
and the grace and the compassion and the empathy that you extend to somebody else, you have to give that to yourself. And that's one of the things that I've discovered during these last couple of months, when I wake up in the morning and I decide what my day is going to be. And I'm a very chaotic person, so I've never been one to have like a planner, but I bought a planner and I write down everything that I could do in a day. And if I do one of those things, I have succeeded. I have won the day, and thank you, I'm done. But if I can do all of them, fantastic. But if I can't, I've chosen the thing that I need to do to move forward. If I have a project to work, instead of being the person that I usually am, which is I stay up until all hours of the night the day before it's due. Now I'm breaking things down into little pieces. I'm like, okay, well, I can't write the entire thing today, which is a way that I used to think, but I can read something about the thing I need to write, or I can watch something that reminds me of the thing, or I can write one sentence that is going to be included in that thing. And like I keep saying thing, but it's just a way to find a new way to be a person who is contributing, right? Because we all want to be productive members of society. But what does that mean when society is at a standstill? Like, what does that mean when we can't gauge that by how early you get into the office, or how late you stay, or, all these different markers that we've had. And I think it's different for everybody, but finding a way to be okay with the way things are, and finding a way to have your circumstances adapt to you. And change. And I mean that in, I guess, teaching people, knowing that if I don't respond to your email after 8 p.m. for a month, you will probably figure out that I don't respond to emails after 8 p.m. So you'll adapt to that, right? So it's this way of knowing what works for you, and then presenting it in a way that is unable to be challenged. Yeah, so just finding the thing that makes you work a little bit, that makes your work feel more grounded in something. I think the message is always grounded in being able to feel the earth and feel yourself present in the moment, instead of the anxiety, which is worrying about things in the past or worrying about things in the future. So bring it all very present and being very clear about where you are at every moment. That's what's helped me. It's something that I've done for a really long time, but I've had to really, really put it into practice in the time of Corona.
The time of Corona. So what I'm hearing is know yourself, know your boundaries.
Yeah.
And
set boundaries.
Right. And be unapologetic and non-negotiable about those boundaries, and communicating them out. Because it's also ultimately about protecting ourselves, not being defensive and not letting people in, but actually really protecting ourselves.
Yeah. And just be mindful that you're not the only person who is going through this. Like, literally the entire world is going through this. So being kind to the person who is late with something, so that will somebody else be, will give you some grace if you're a little bit late. Like, we just have to sort of expand the way that we consider other people. One of the things that I've found the most amazing about this is the way that not everyone, but most people have found to look out for each other. We even just the act of wearing a mask is about protecting yourself and protecting other people. And I think that I've seen a lot more of that over the last couple of months. And I think I hope that's something that we carry on into whatever's after this.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you very much for that wisdom there, Bassey. It's a nice way to move us into questions and answers. Be good to oneself, but actually be good to each other, because we need that support. Thank you. Let's move into questions and answers. We've got Kale who's come up, and Kale I know has been looking at the chat, and there's some that are coming through. Kale is our manager for diversity, equity, and inclusion over at Howard Center. So Kale, share with us what we have by ways of some questions that we can put out to Bassey and have a chat about.
Sure. Hello, all. I'm looking through some of your questions. So, Bassey, I'm going to kind of give you there are a couple of themes that are showing up around diagnosis and medication and having conversations around those things. So there's curiosity around when you were diagnosed and when you were open to receiving help, and how folks could engage with you or those in their lives who are currently undergoing mental health crisis or taking medications and trying to figure it out. So how do we support those people in our lives without stigmatizing their experience or being nosy? And like what worked for you? Yeah, I think that's a good capture.
Yeah, so the first question I think was when was I diagnosed? I was diagnosed January of 2004. It's all in the books. I don't want to go over it. But I was on tour at that Poetry Jam, had a breakdown. Well, I had a series of very slow, trickling breakdowns until a big one backstage. And because of the unique situation that I was in and the fact that I just wanted to go back to work, I was very receptive and very open to treatment, because in my mind, and I mentioned it in the book, it was like you take antibiotics for 30 days, the infection's gone, you go about your life, right? And that's the way that I was approaching it. So I jumped in with both feet immediately, and then 5 months or so later, is it 5 months? Yeah, something 6 to 7 months later, I was like, okay, well, I'm not fixed. I'm not back at work. I'm just taking these medications over and over again. Like, when do I get to be normal again? And so I had a setback in that medium. But what it was is that I'm very fortunate and very privileged to have had people in my life that didn't throw me away. And a large part of my fear is and has always been that at some point someone's going to say, "Oh, you're not worth it," and then that's it. That I'm not somebody worthy of caring for or caring about, and I think that's a very real fear for a lot of people. That worry that they're not going to be supported, or that they're only going to be seen as somebody who is sick, right? And that fear keeps people from getting help, and that fear keeps people from doing the work. And it does take work. Like, it's not a connect the dots situation. It is connect the dots. It's connect four. It's a whole bunch of other things, and then you got to come back to it. But I think knowing a few things, one, that there were other people who I could find as examples who were successfully treating it, knowing that there was an other side that I could eventually get to. Hopefully, there wasn't a lot of people back then. Definitely weren't any Black people that I could immediately recognize. But it was primarily knowing that this didn't define me. It didn't make me a broken person. It wasn't something that would keep me from being cared for, keep opportunities from me. Of course, I had to learn, who was healthy for me to be in my life, whether or not they accepted me, what, things, what jobs, what circumstances, what events were healthy for me to be in. I had to learn all of those things so that I wasn't just kind of blindly, searching for things. I had to be very clear with myself about what it is that I needed. And I think that everybody is different, but what you can do to support somebody is to ask and say, I'm noticing that you may not be feeling great, or I'm noticing, I don't know what the wording is, but I've noticed, changes in your behavior. How how can I support you, right? Because if you ask, are you okay? I'm fine. How are you? I'm good. You know, like that's, but if you say, how do I support you? It actually stops you for a second. And that person is like, oh, wait, did you say how am I, or how can I support you? And then you think about it. So even if they don't have an answer for you right then, they know that at a future date, when they are ready to receive whatever they don't even know what they need, but when they need that support, you put yourself there as somebody they can come to, and say, I need some help. I need support. I don't know what I need, or they're very clear about what they need at that time. But I think just being very supportive and being protective of yourself too. I have a lot of questions about people asking, well, you know, my partner or my mom or my sister or my sibling is going through a thing, and what do I do? How do I save? And I said, if they're going through something and you are unsure, there is a space for you to seek your own therapy to support yourself. Because if you're asking somebody to lean on you and you don't know what you're getting into, you need someone who will help you with the language, who will help you with what support is, as opposed to codependency. Because quite often I think that we think that being codependent is supportive, and it's not, because there is work that goes into being a healthy person. And if somebody is not allowing me the space to do that work, then I won't ever grow into it's difficult to say personal responsibility, because I think people hear that and they take that in a very Republican way, and I definitely don't mean it that way. I just mean that when you go through the whatever systems you need to get yourself to a place that feels healthy for you, and if you see yourself going there, you can always recall the steps it took, right? If somebody was kind of like pumping you with things and giving you all the things you need, you never learn how to stand straight. I'm not sure if that's clear, but yeah.
One of my favorite parts of the book, Bassey, was when you were teaching a bit and you were on tour, and you were given the spiel, I'm fine, and you weren't eating and you weren't sleeping. And I don't recall the name of the woman, the female character in the book, who just cut through all of your defense. And I think you said that she looked at you and simply just said to you, it doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah, that was Alice.
That felt really significant.
Yeah. That, I mean, again, to have that be the one of the first voices that I heard, encouraged me to do the work, encouraged me to seek whatever help that I could find, because this is someone who clearly cared what happened to me. If I couldn't figure out how to care for myself or care about myself, this is someone who did, and that meant more to me than I knew at the time, because I think about that moment so often. I think about her so often, because she was one of the first people who got to the middle of it and just let me know that I didn't have to feel that way, but also there was a path out of it. There's another side. I think that's important too. There's something else. Yeah, and I have to be just in the spirit of transparency. Over the last week, I upped my antidepressant from 150 to 200, because though I'm the healthiest I've ever been in my life, I don't know what winters do to me. And so just preemptively, my psychiatrist was like, let's try this, because I'm noticing like a downturn. So I'm hearing myself talk and I feel like I'm speaking fast or I'm speaking long. And so if I stop in the middle, it's because I'm aware of I'm hearing myself. So just anyone who's like heard me in a podcast like last week and I sound different, that could be it. So just want to be transparent about that.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the extra information, and also, the sensitivity that you have right now in this moment of time, and the being kind to oneself and being kind to one another rings true For sure. There's one thing in the chat which is around identity, and somebody's mentioning, Bassey, you and I had a chat about African American, or do we identify as Black, or and again, it's not necessarily to do with mental health, but I think many people, as we're going through COVID, we're also trying to figure out what we do around racial identity and understanding of what's appropriate by way of language. So the question here is to us, so how do each of you prefer to be described or identified? I'm a nomad. That's how I like to be described. I don't know about you, Bassey.
I'm Black. Yeah, I'm Black. I identify with Black people all over the world. There's in Nigeria, there are massive protests going on against police brutality, and it's a Black country, and it's Black, officers who are killing and beating and robbing Black people, but they're doing that to Black people. So I'm connected to that. There's things going on in Namibia, there are things going on in South Africa, and so I identify with globally as a global Black person. Culturally American with Nigerian leanings, Nigerian by birthplace, I guess. I don't know, but I'm Black. Like there's just no two ways about it for me.
Yeah, I'm more culturally British, born New Jersey, but definitely Black. Which is really interesting. And to the point, it was an anonymous attendee who asked the question, but I was actually quite educated myself when I left the States and moved to England when I was in my early 20s. And the word Black was being used more as a political definition of identity rather than the color of somebody's skin. So I was surprised to see that in that cultural context, Black also referred to anybody who really wasn't white, whether you were Asian or, it's a political piece. So it's interesting how things evolve. People evolve, language evolves, cultures evolve. Nothing stays the same from one day to the next.
What was interesting is when I was in Nigeria, Asian people, Indian people were white. They would refer to, and even certain light-skinned Nigerians were called white. There were times when people would refer to me as not white, but not Black because of my accent. Like it's very complicated. There's a very complicated relationship with colonization and Eurocentric values and anti-Blackness that runs everywhere.
Yeah. And it's such a question of identity, isn't it? I mean, we've got our own individual identities of who we are very privately and personally, whether it's our personality, and but we also have to carry these social personas around with us as well, and the two things don't always jive, which can create some tension in and of itself. Yeah, very good. Kel, any other questions you think are worthy?
Yes, absolutely. We're having some questions around relationships in general. So romantic partnerships and relationships. Do you think that in your experience, have there been challenges around this because of your diagnosis and your experience with bipolar 2? And then also on the other side of it, we have someone who's asking about how to, well, they said deal with, but how to work with someone in your life who is mentally ill, but in denial. And so how to utilize the relationship to offer help or stay safe yourself. Do you have any thoughts on either of those?
Yeah, I'll answer the second question first. I stated earlier that it's important for the, not caregiver, I can't think of the word, to also, if it's someone that's close to you, someone that's in your life permanently, you going to therapy to understand how to talk to them, how to take care of yourself. Like, I cannot stress enough how important it is for you to take care of yourself while you're trying to look out for somebody else. And on that note, you also cannot want someone to get help more than they want it for themselves. it's just impossible. You just can't do that. You can be, again, someone that is a beacon, someone that they can come to when they are ready. But if they're not ready, there's nothing you can do. I wish there was something I could say, but there's nothing that you can do. But again, if it's someone that's close to you, you going and having a conversation with somebody about yourself so that you can stabilize yourself in order to be someone that can be helpful and not harmful. Because I think often too, and I've encountered this with friendships that I've had and come and gone, where people kind of infantilize me and they think that's support, and it's not. It's not helpful to me. Or they disallow growth because their permanent memory of me is someone who needed help. So when I no longer need it, they don't know how to adjust to that. So being in therapy can kind of help you, navigate that. So there's that. As far as relationships go, I have made a personal choice for myself, Bassey Ikpi, that I am best unpartnered. In the way that, this is a wild correlation, but in the way that an alcoholic can't drink a little bit, I feel like I'm an emotional cutter, and relationships, whether they're good or bad, kind of, I hate to use the word trigger because trigger has been deflated in society, but it activates anxiety, it activates depression, it activates things that I'm working really hard to contain. And it's just not worth it to me to test it out, I guess. It's not an active pursuit of mine, if at all. But I do not think, that does not mean that people with diagnoses cannot have healthy, fulfilling relationships. It just takes a little bit more work. It takes a certain kind of person who's willing to do the work with you. I know many, bipolar, people who have bipolar, people who have anxiety, people who have depression, all these other things, who are in committed, beautiful, loving, supportive relationships. So it is absolutely possible. I just personally, it's not a choice that I make for myself, for better or for worse.
Yeah, sounds like it throws you off your game a little bit.
Yeah, it's just not worth it to me. I've been very, very healthy and very, very confident and content, and I'm doing very well. And the last time I wasn't doing well, it was around that, and it's just, I don't want to test it. I don't want to have a little cocktail or a little wine. I'm good. I'm fine.
Long may it last. More power to your elbows, as we'll say in the UK. What else have we got, Kale?
There was someone who was asking a question relative to the title of your book, which was similar to one of the questions that Jude was toying with. So I have a question about the title of your book. I think you're saying that you're telling your truth as you feel it. Or were you lying to the world or to yourself? And were you aware that you were lying?
All of the above. All of the above. Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know if I said it in this conversation, but the book that I was writing is not the book that I ended up writing. The book that I started out with was completely different. It had a different tone. It had different point of view. It was just different. But I started writing these essays just to, let me backtrack. When I started writing the book, I was going through one of the worst depressive episodes of my life, and I was fairly certain that I was not going to make it out. And I started writing letters and notes and things to friends and family, just to sort of say, I've tried, I'm trying really hard. I've tried for a really long time. Here are some of the things that I've had to do. This is how bad it's been in the past, and it's bad now. And I don't know if I have I don't have the desire to get up again. Look at all the times I've gotten up. Look at all the times that I've had to do. That time when you didn't hear from me for 2 weeks, this is where I was, like stuff like that. I just wanted them to know. I didn't want anyone to walk away feeling like they didn't try hard enough, or there's nothing they could say. They didn't tell me to go jogging enough, or they didn't tell me to, you know, whatever things that people say when someone's not doing well. I wanted them to be very clear that this was not it's not a thing that they could do. It was something that I've already tried, I guess. So that was separate than the book. That was something else. And when I started writing, backing up again, what happened is that I had my friends and my family come to me and say, listen, we love you. We care about you. We don't know what to do right now, but we're asking you to try. If you can't do it for yourself, can you do it for us? What does trying mean for you? Can you try? And that meant, and I was like, you know, very, you know, I love my family. I love my friends. I've never felt unloved. I felt unliked from time to time, but never unloved. So I was like, okay, I'll do this for y'all. You'll see that this time is different. It's not going to work. I will, you know, the conversation, they contacted my therapist, and the conversation was, I would go to, and my poor therapist, I would tell her just enough, right? I would tell her just enough so she couldn't call anyone, so she couldn't, you know, do anything in her legal power, which is horrible and cruel and manipulative. And it's something that I apologize to her as often. She tells me to stop apologizing in general. But yeah, so I said, I will go to therapy from once a week to 4 to 5 times a week, every day if I need to. I'll double my medication. I'll do all these things, and you'll see that it's not going to work. I'll prove to you that it's not going to work. It worked. It got me to the next day, and it got me to the next day, and then it got me to the next day, and it got me to the next day, and it got me here. But as I was getting better, or as I was working towards getting better, I realized that the conversation about what it felt like was still necessary. I had shared some of the stuff that I was writing, and it made people say, oh my God, like that, I don't understand it, but I'm compassionate because that's hard. I don't know how I would be able to live in this, because I'm reading it and I don't know how to live in it while I'm just reading somebody else's experience. So I changed the perspective of the book, and I allowed it to show up the way that it came out. And I'm very grateful to my editor for allowing that, because I wrote in third person and second person and changed POVs in the middle of a sentence sometimes. The tense was all over the place. And so when I started writing these things and I would send it to her, she noticed that in many of the essays, there was a variation of, I'm telling the truth, but I'm lying. She's telling the truth, but she's lying. He's telling the truth, but he's lying. Like, there was a variation of that in almost all the essays I sent. And it meant different things at different times. Sometimes it meant that I wanted you to believe what I'm saying. I know it's not the truth, but I need you to believe it. So I am telling the truth for you, but I'm lying to myself. Sometimes it meant that somebody didn't want me to hurt. They didn't want to hurt me. So they were deliberately lying in order to protect me in some way. And I'm a perceptive person, so I could always tell, and I could always, like, I don't feel like you're being honest, but I feel like it's important for you that I believe you, so I'm going to. So that's what it meant sometimes. Yeah, so it meant different things. And of course, when we changed the title, because the book was called something else. So when we changed the title, it's supposed to be a holding title. It was supposed to be a working title. And then I was like, this is what the book is. Like, every essay, every story in here fits into this frame, whether I'm lying to myself, or I'm lying to other people, or people are lying to me, or people are messing with the truth a little bit. My memory is flawed in ways that I accept, but my emotional memory is very clear. I can't tell you what day, I can't tell you who was in the room, but I can tell you almost to brutal detail what it felt like, right? There were times that I would write something and be transported into that moment, and I'm crying, or I'm shaking, or I'm, having the experience because I remember it so clearly. But I've been told, and I think we've all been told, that historical and factual truth is more important than emotional truth. And I just don't believe that. I think that, of course, they're both important, but I don't think that emotional truth is something that can be, that should be dismissed all of a sudden, because it was a Wednesday and not a Thursday, the way you felt is dismissed. And that's absurd. That doesn't make any sense. So I was holding on to exploring and being very, very clear about my emotional memory, but also knowing that the facts that I had could be wrong. So, and knowing deliberately not to go and look. I could go look, I could ask somebody, I could, hey, what day did you graduate? I could ask, but that wasn't important. And knowing that I was wrong about it as part of the lie, but the truth was in the impact that moment had.
That's brilliant, because it reminds me of the passage in the book, Bassey, when it chronologically it is 1986, because I remember sitting at the University of Maryland in College Park in a lecture, and somebody said the shuttle blew up. You remember it as 1984. I remember it as 1986. Who the heck cares? The point is the shuttle blew up, and it's how it felt. Forget about the detail. The detail is insignificant. And, to have this time together this evening and to talk about that gift of emotionality, to me, that is what makes the challenges special, right? And we're not superhuman. We're not extra heroes. Like, we say we have all these other, but the emotion and the wisdom that comes through that, and the self-knowing is something that you cannot replicate. So I'm very grateful for the spirit and the artist that you are,
thank you,
to be able to bring to us things that are unbelievably gifted. And, not that we're not all just human with flesh and blood, but let us also remember the gifts that we have. And in this COVID world in which we're living, and I've said it before, we have to create our way out of this. And we are reliant upon the non-traditional ways of seeing the world, the non-linear ways of existing in the world. We live in fake news all the time. So, we've got fake data all the time. Why not embrace it? Why not embrace it? Before we end, I just want to ask you a question, because it was one of the questions that was asked of me when I was interested in coming to work with Howard Center 5 years ago. And it was a simple question. What makes you happy?
It's interesting that you asked that, because just earlier I was talking about, in another conversation, I was talking about how I no longer chase happiness. I seek contentment. I am content. I am currently happy because I'm talking to you, and I had a very low energy day, but I rested, and my energy is up. I'm looking forward to reading some scripts and watching some TV later, and maybe eating. My sister's in town. That makes me happy. My son's in the next room. He gets on my nerves, but he's okay. So those things make me happy, but tomorrow, maybe not, but I'm content. I am the healthiest and the most okay I've ever been in my life. And okay is fantastic for somebody who shoots up and shoots low as quickly and hard as hard as I had over the course of my life. So I am okay. And
that's fantastic. I love the contentment. Thank you very much, Bassey. It's been a delight having the chance to speak with you. Denise, can you come back through and close out the session for us, if you would? Thank you, Bassey.
Wow. Thank you so much, Jude. Thank you for for taking the time. I know that you're tired and
it's late where you are. We're both energized.
But thank you. Just want to say thank you.
Thank you both. That was a really wonderful and very real conversation. It was really nice to have you with us. Kale, thanks too for your support. I want to let everyone know that Bassey has generously signed copies of her book, I'm Telling the Truth, But I'm Lying, which can be purchased from our bookseller partner, Phoenix Books here in Burlington. You can find the link right at howardcenter.org below the fold on our homepage. So go there, buy many. If you haven't had the opportunity, it'll be a great opportunity to read the book and learn more. Just in closing, if folks would be willing to complete the feedback form that you'll receive shortly by email, that would be super helpful. It really helps us to get better and to hear what topics and speakers are of interest to you. Thanks to all of our sponsors. And then just a reminder, we have two more weekly sessions. One is next Tuesday, 10/20 at 12 noon, and we'll be talking about parenting, education, and COVID-19. And then following Monday, the 26th, we'll be talking about mental health and exercise and leisure activities. So thank you very much. Until then, be very well. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.